Welcome to the FDN-Thrive podcast. We interview leaders in the functional health space who bring you the most up-to-date, cutting-edge information for people who have tried it all for their health issues. We hope you enjoy the show.
So that is this exhaustive phase when even though the stress is there, even though you need to get up and go, it's like you just don't have it anymore. And in this phase, it can feel like you can just get wiped out. You could try to exercise and just be wiped out the rest of the day. It can just feel like you're almost walking through like water or something that makes it feel like you're just using everything you have to get through the day. And in that place, we can start to see other symptoms arise.
Hey there, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the FDN-Thrive podcast. My name is Evan Transu, aka Health Coach Ev, and I will be your host for today's show. Now, we're going to be interviewing Candace McCallister. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, amongst other things, and really fun talking to her. She has a history with mental health issues, as do I, and it's always very empowering and inspiring for me to hear stories about those of us who dealt with mental health issues and found resolution in the natural health space. It is not something that people really turn to first when dealing with mental health issues. Quite frankly, it's not even always the answer, and it's not always the complete answer. But I have found so much of the time this is a significant piece of the puzzle. Sometimes it's the entire puzzle for people when it comes to dealing with mental health issues. And that's why I think I love sharing these so much, because most people, when they think of physical disease, they at least humor the idea that you could feel better if you ate a little better, but it's hard to connect that sometimes to mental health. And that's why I'm really excited to share this episode with you today. A little bit about Candace. She is the daughter of a health food store owner. She thought she had it all figured out by the time she was about 13 years old. Because of this, she ate lots of fruits and vegetables, didn't eat hardly any fat, and even became a vegetarian. She was a shy and kind of low energy child, but she figured that was just her personality. Unfortunately, she started having some minor health issues which continued to get worse through her college years. This mostly involved getting an inordinate number of cavities along with some other teeth issues. Also, she would get very lightheaded upon standing, have terrible stomach cramps after eating certain foods, and suffer extremely painful menstrual cramps. Throughout these years, she also struggled with many low-grade mental health symptoms, including anxiety, depression, and OCD symptoms. Now, Candace absolutely was able to turn all these things around. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to tell you how she did that. You're just going to have to listen to the episode. So, without further ado, here we go. Well, Candace, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, this is an interview that I'm really excited to do because, folks, there are thousands of FDNs out there in the world. I do know quite a few of them, and I've gotten to hear many different stories, but this is one of those rare times where it's like, I don't know Candace yet, and I'm reading her bio before we're doing this podcast interview, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, this woman is right up my alley, because it was largely my issues with mental health that got me into the natural health space to begin with. So I think it is so much more powerful. Not that people don't take my story seriously, but it is cool when we add, the counselor title or the psychologist or psychiatrist, because I've talked to holistic versions of all of them. So let's get into kind of your story, Candace. Now, what health issues did you deal with maybe in your life, and when did they start? Were these things that were like going on as a kid, or maybe you got them teenage years, adulthood? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that honestly, the mental health piece, that side of things was coming up for me probably first. I don't remember having many health issues as a child. I did get some like mouth sores, like canker sores, but mostly my mom happened to actually be in the natural health world. She owned a health food store. So she was really intentional about our food and natural practices in our family. But I was a very shy child, and also just kind of like, I don't know, like nervous, like easily like felt like I was doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like probably by middle school, like all of that had really compounded, and most of it went undiagnosed, I would say, but started coming out with like some eating disorder patterns, with like some OCD patterns. And my parents didn't pick up on it too much. And it probably wasn't until I was in counseling school that I was able to really see all of it clearly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But as I reflect on my journey of health, like I realize that's a piece, like a thread that has been there all this time. And really like through college, I ended up, being a big like math and science person and doing like biology as my major in college and being really focused on that, but continued to have, I guess probably in those years, started to have some digestive issues and some like anxiety, mental health stuff coming up. So sometimes that took the form of like leaning more toward depression and sometimes more toward anxiety and sometimes this kind of like OCD piece in there. I was, very high achieving and all of that looked great on the outside, but the internal experience was kind of miserable.
That's really interesting because it's not like all types of people can't deal with anxiety or depression or whatever it might be mental health wise, but there is like this specific profile that I've heard so many times because I fall into the exact same category that you do. Like at one time, at least before depression kicked in, very high achieving in school. I'm certainly mostly left brain, like science and math type of person. Those were absolutely my strong suits, but definitely do not give me a paintbrush. That's not going to go so well. And it started out young for me as well, right? I was having not every day by any means, but panic attacks as young as 5 years old. And that really became a bigger thing for me in middle school and high school. So obviously you got, well, is it fair to say that you got into the natural health space because your mom was in it, or was that just like a thing that mom does, but you never really thought much about it?
I think that it was a huge influence. My mom, there were several things like that are really kind of blazed into my memory, but my mom had my sister at home, birthed her at home when I was 10. And so that was really different from other people. And
Yes.
I spent a lot of time at the health food store. That was kind of like the first job I had, was helping out there. So, and just, things that would come up, my mom always had natural things that we could do. So it's definitely a part of the influence for me. And as a biology student in college, I was looking through all of the options for like, what do I do with this degree? And I remember reading through them all and just feeling like none of them were quite right. And of course, like just because of like traditional lists, like none of the alternative health world occupations were listed there. And so it was sort of a tension of like, do I go to medical school and do this regular medical route when I really just, because I think of my upbringing, didn't resonate with it. And so I ended up at that point taking a break and then deciding to go into counseling for my master's, which felt more natural. I still wasn't especially aware of what my options were.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, I think that's something, because again, I'm in the mental health space outside of FDN stuff. And that is something that I don't care if you're really taking a natural route or allopathic route, both sides can utilize that, right? Like that's
Right.
like my number one go-to thing for anyone is just, I don't care where you're at. I don't care what's going on. Let's at least start there, get you talking to someone that knows about these conditions and can help you through them. And then we'll worry about what specific route is correct for you, whether it's medication or stuff like that. Now,
Absolutely.
just to be clear for the audience, and we do not have to get into, in fact, I don't want to get into details of either side. If it is more of a circumstantial thing, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. But I always divide mental health issues for people into two very separate categories. And one is the circumstantial, like I just alluded to, and the other is non-circumstantial. So what that means in my world is that if someone had a set of circumstances that clearly led to their mental health progression, I would call that circumstantial mental health issues. And if someone was kind of like me, where, at 5 years old, I mean, everything was going really well. I mean, I grew up in a great area, had good family, good friends, did well in school. There's like nothing to really complain about. And yet I have these very severe non-circumstantial mental health issues. Like, what category would you say you most think you fall into?
Yeah, it's always one of those things, right, that we're trying to figure out, right? Like, could this thing have been the thing that, caused these problems? I think it's like
Hmm.
one of those things that you start to delve into, especially in like counseling school. Like, what in my past could have caused all of this? And yeah, similarly, I didn't feel like I had big things that went wrong. And so you wonder, like, is it a personality thing, or is it some other underlying, eventually, is it some other underlying health imbalances or things going on in my body that I wasn't aware of? So yeah, I feel like it leans more that way for me. And at the same time, like, I can see things that I work a lot from a body-based counseling perspective. So like somatic experiencing. So we're looking at like the nervous system and what's causing arousal activation into that sympathetic nervous system response. And so, I've done some work around like past events in my life, and that has helped me to regulate better in my nervous system, even though they weren't major. I don't have like a major trauma.
Okay, great. And I think it's important to specify this stuff because I am very clear and careful with individuals that I'm talking to, because it's like, and again, I hate listing stuff, so I'm not going to do that. Everyone can use their imagination. If someone has had severe, clear, obvious trauma in their life that led to mental health issues, I'm not really going to necessarily start promoting the natural route as step one. I mean, certainly someone eating better is not going to feel worse, but it's probably more complex than that, right? Not that the natural side can't be complex too, with the different things going on in the body, but it's a different type of complex. So I think it's important for people to know that people like you and I, all right, sure, we've had our stuff just like anyone else, but there was probably a little something more here, that didn't add up and could have been more biochemical. So
Right, absolutely.
no one gets into the FDN course by accident, right? Certainly not at this time. This is a very interesting group of people that has health histories and of their own. Very rarely do I hear about someone else just coming in for a family member or friend, although I've heard that once or twice. So, what is it about your personal journey that led you from going to maybe taking almost a medical route to counseling to then I'm going to sign up for the FDN course? Like, what triggers you to do that?
Yeah, I think that I've had like this, probably because of trying to figure out my own stuff, just like all of us, have had this desire to understand, to learn more, to kind of delve deeper into what really helps a person get better. Um, and and that was true for myself and for different people in my life too. And so I had a brief, or I don't know, there was a period of time where after counseling school, I was having babies and mostly home, and I did a Thai body work training. And so I went through that. It was an apprenticeship style program, and it happened to be just like down the block from where we lived in Chicago. And so I learned just all of these new connections and all this new information, and got this hope that feels really similar to FDN, that you're not stuck with whatever pains or symptoms or things that are going on in your body. There change is possible. And so that program, I started like working on people who had like pain patterns and tensions and things that had gone on for years, and seeing change happen. And then they started asking me more questions about their health, and I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know more for myself, for them, for my kids. So it just was sort of a draw that kept going. And I probably heard, Whitney was saying she heard Reed with an interview with Sean Croxton. I think that's when I heard him too and got really interested. So
That's
yeah.
Sean Croxton must have got half of the FDN community involved or something, which is not an easy feat. I mean, we're thousands of practitioners strong, right? It is
Yeah,
just so cool how often I hear his name come up. So when did you end up graduating from the course? Like, has it been a few years?
it's been several years. I would say probably 5 years.
Wow, nice. All right.
Yeah.
And I only asked because, yeah, I mean, he only had his podcast, I think, until about 2015 or 2016. Like, it ended a while ago. So most of the people that say that ended up going through even before me. So I think that's awesome. Now, when you're going through the course, this is the part I find the most interesting. We're learning about things that people might unfortunately never have an opportunity to learn about unless they work with an FDN practitioner or someone with a very similar philosophy, which is unfortunately pretty rare. What are you finding on your labs that's maybe surprising? And of course, this is a podcast where we are for the public, but we're for the public that wants to learn more about this stuff. So you could feel free to, if there's more of a technical type of thing here, feel free to throw that in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm actually excited to share this part. I've been thinking about it today. So we did the BioHealth 205 for looking at hormones and cortisol and DHEA and all of that. And part of the program, like, that really struck me at the time, everything I was seeing was about, it all starts with gut health. That was really the focus. And with FDN, we started with stress, with cortisol and stress response. And that seemed like a really different kind of place to start. But it resonated with me so much, especially coming from a counseling background. And even more and more as I continue to progress and learn, like, I find that it's such an important place to start with clients too. So anyway, I found it interesting that starting place has been so helpful to me and was so helpful to me in the moment. When I did the program, my family had just moved to Arkansas. We were in the middle of a big transition. I had 3 kids, young children, and I had been pregnant or breastfeeding for 8 years straight, I think.
Wow.
And I was so depleted. I was so stressed, and but I had this vision of, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to do this with my life. Like, I want to be holding space for people to have like a holistic experience of health and of really seeing things change in their lives. So I would get up at like 5 in the morning so that I could do the course, even though, yeah, my days were so full and there was so little space for it. So when I did that BioHealth 205, everything was just so low. I was definitely in that exhaustive phase. And it was a wake-up call, really, of how depleted I was, how this was not just a feeling I had of like, yeah, I feel tired, but that there was like actual data for that.
Correct. And one of the things that I've been doing with the practitioners that I think is fun, and we're not going like overwhelming with it, right? Because of course, every FDN could really, if we wanted to, sit here for hours on very technical subjects, right? But I think it's important for them to be able to walk away with a couple good nuggets that they might not have known before. So no one has actually brought up the phases of HPA axis dysfunction yet in those that I've interviewed. So I would love, and I mean, you could feel free to kind of go into it here. Can you give like a general overview of HPA axis dysfunction? Because most people are still calling it adrenal fatigue, and we obviously refer to it as that. And then what the heck is the exhaustive phase?
Sure. So the HPA axis, we use that term because it includes the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. So we're thinking of this as more of a system of how our body is responding to stress. And so this comes also from like nervous system activation. So we're thinking about that layered on top of this, that like when we have a stress response, when we are confronted with something, it can even be just a small, like something that triggers us, then we're activated, our nervous system is activated, and we get this cortisol release, as well as like epinephrine, norepinephrine. And that's wonderful. We want our bodies to do that in response to stress because that gives us a lot of lovely things. Better eyesight, our arms and legs are energized, our heart, we're getting more blood flow. It slows down the unnecessary things for the moment, like digestion and reproduction, and so that we can really like face a tiger or whatever,
Right.
whatever thing that is we need that energy for. But what is not great is when that activation level is constant or triggered really often, and our bodies are in that state more than they are in a parasympathetic or rest and digest state. So with the HPA axis, we're thinking about this whole body reaction, which we're always thinking about, right? With FDNs, that this is not just an isolated thing. It's not just the cortisol level. It's this full body response. Like our atlas and axis, those top two vertebrae in your neck, they actually shift when you get nervous system activated, so that you have less ability to socially engage, because it's helpful in a life or death situation to be able to run or fight and not be socially engaged. So
Wow.
yeah,
Oh, I'm learning something today. I love it.
so that like if we're in this state, like we're having tension in relationships, we're not digesting our food well because that's slowed down. Maybe there's infertility or like other issues that could stem from that, because the body is just in this place of like, this is life or death. And so if that sort of activation phase, and it can be so many different levels. So actually the freeze response, like when somebody is like frozen, which often correlates with like a depressed state, when somebody is in that state, it's actually the highest level of nervous system activation. So it can look like not activated at all. But underneath, there's just all this stuff going on. So all that to say, if we're in that phase for a long time, our bodies begin to get depleted, and that's going to affect the hormone levels. And so in kind of an acute phase, when things are just, when you've had stress for a little while and you're amped up and the cortisol is up and the stress response is up, we would expect cortisol to be higher than normal. And that makes sense, right? That's what the body's doing. And so that would be kind of the first phase. Things are hyped up. But then over time, if this cortisol is just continuously being pumped out and the stress response continues, our body starts to not be able to produce and to pump out as much cortisol as it could before. So in that phase, you could actually test these hormones and think that things look kind of normal, but that isn't normal when you're under a lot of stress. It wouldn't be normal to be in a normal calm range of cortisol when you are actually really activated and really under a lot of stress. And then over time, if it just keeps going, then even under stress, your body is pumping out less than that average amount of cortisol. So that is this exhaustive phase, when even though the stress is there, even though you need to get up and go, it's like you just don't have it anymore. And in this phase, it can feel like you can just get wiped out. You could try to exercise and just be wiped out the rest of the day. It can just feel like you're almost like walking through like water or something that makes it feel like you're just using everything you have to get through the day. And in that place, we can start to see other symptoms arise. And what we learned in FDN is that is really connected. We use like a graph where this HPA axis function is in the middle, and all of these other things, the gut dysbiosis, the food sensitivities, the other hormone imbalances, the musculoskeletal systems, the mental health, all of these things are affected by kind of that chronic stress and the ways that that is having really like a widespread effect on the body.
Great explanation. And I love that you went through, I was kind of hoping you would go through all the phases and not just the exhaustive. I think that's so valuable for people listening to hear. And I still use that original chart, with the like green for the normal, I think it is, and then yellow for acute, whatever,
Yeah.
to this day, because it's so useful for people to see. And let's be honest, most people aren't working with an FDN, unfortunately, in the acute phase, because we still have that hormonal output to basically be like, oh, listen, I know I'm stressed, but I'm good. I can do the 4 hours of sleep thing. I can go drinking on the weekends and I'm fine, like
Right.
college life or something, right? And then that compensatory phase, it explains to so many people why they got maybe tricked by their labs. It's something that comes up all the time here, like their blood work or lab work looks quote unquote normal. Well, here's the thing. In that compensatory phase that Candace was talking about, you have this thing where basically, yeah, more or less, it might look a little low, but your numbers could still be in range, but they should be elevated based on the stress that you're under, but they can't do that anymore. So the exhaustive is, I mean, it's something that is intimidating for sure, but the good news is we see that all the time and it's something that people can bounce back from. I actually, at 21 years old, Candace, when I went through the course, I was in the exhaustive phase. Not bad, but like just had gotten there kind of thing. And I'm like,
Wow.
wow, this is something I really need to work on. And I just retested. I'm 25 now. I retested, a few years later, never really thought to do it again. And it was like a very minor acute based on more or less nothing other than the morning cortisol. And you know what? When you're coming from exhaustive, a minor acute's a good place to be when you feel pretty good. I was like, I'll take that. So it shows that the FDN philosophy works. Now, what were some of the things that you started implementing to help get you out of that exhaustive phase? Because I mean, that can be something that requires some major lifestyle changes. I love what you brought up about exercise. I had to, as a 21-year-old guy, it seemed ridiculous, but I had to kind of put that on the back burner for a few months while I healed myself. So what happened for you? Like, what did you have to do?
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know if this will be sort of helpful to people in that phase, but because I was still breastfeeding at the time, we had to do kind of an adjusted protocol. So I also would say, like, even if that's like, even if it's a phase where it's like, is this even a good time for me to do this? It still made a whole lot of difference. And I did make major dietary changes. It was probably when I had like toyed with being off of like gluten and dairy completely, but I think that's probably the first time that I became like serious about it. So I know that, yeah, I know now that like gluten is a big problem for me. But I didn't really know that at the time. And it seemed like such a hard time, which I think is so true of us in the exhaustive phase. It's like, do I even have energy to do this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a scary thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can feel like a big ask, with clients too, that they're just exhausted. They need this to work, Um,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, I mean, I was kind of in that place too. But it was a gentler, I think, because of being of breastfeeding at the time. It was a gentler protocol, which has also been something I've carried with me for clients, is to know, like, how can I be gentle with them and do this in a way that that isn't further bringing like a stress response, especially if they're in a really like demanding season of life.
Yes, sometimes less is more, and that's what's cool about our practitioners, right? We have to adapt, and most of us get it. Well, actually, I would say the vast majority of us get it. Like we can empathize with those types of things. Like I remember what it's like to be in that exhaustive phase. So, okay, we're not going to give 10 different changes this month. It's like, can you do this? Let's get some momentum going. Let's get an easy win, get you feeling a little better, and then you can kind of start stacking more stuff on top of that. So
Yeah.
you went through the course several years back. Now, I'm always very clear with people on here. We are not pretending to be like, all right, everything always works 100% in FDN. The only thing I believe is that FDN can absolutely help everyone to some degree, right? So I'm curious, like, where is your health now, especially like the mental health? Like, is it better than before? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I feel like it's so solid. Like it's surprisingly solid, you know? Uh, I I mean, I feel surprised about it sometimes looking back. I recently, actually this week, I had a client who said to me, she said, I thought that these things were just part of my personality. Like I had settled on like this anxiety, this like, kind of super sensitivity. That was just part of my personality. And she was like, and now I'm not like that anymore.
Yeah.
And I really resonate with that yeah, I was having a conversation with my husband, like we had kind of labeled me as low energy person, and
Wow.
and now I think that's just not true. Like I'm one of the most energetic people I know. um yeah, as far as we've had some major life stressors this year, and I feel like they were things that would have it would easily knock somebody out, but I felt able to kind of roll with it and to maintain things, like knowing these like pillars. Maybe I can't do everything, but these pillars really keep me feeling better, so I do them. um and then just being able to be aware of my own needs and handle that stress better, which was a big piece of the learning for me. So yeah,
Sure.
that's all changed. And then I actually, like a year or two in, I can't remember, I hadn't done the gut testing. I had waited, which again was sort of like a phased approach for me based on kind of my life circumstances at the time. But I had my knee just like kind of lock up several times. It was the weirdest thing. I'd never had anything like it, but I had this sense, other people in my life are like, you need to go to the doctor. And I thought, I can't think of what the doctor would have to offer on this right now. Like I've checked it for any kind of like major, like if it were an injury, but it wasn't an injury. And so knowing my body work stuff, and then with FDN, I just started kind of working through what I knew to do, and did the GI map gut test at that time, and had actually some autoimmune bacteria that have some research link to like rheumatoid arthritis come up.
Mhm.
And so I did a full kind of autoimmune protocol at that time, and did some dietary change. And this knee problem, it had happened maybe 3 times, and it was scary. It hurt really bad, and I couldn't really walk. And that's been probably 3 years ago now, and it just completely went away.
Nice.
I've
You're
never had it again. And it's one of those things that I keep in my mind as like this idea that like that you have something happen and you're stuck. Like it's not true. Like there's more options. There's more things that you can do. And so it opened my mind a lot to how much things are interconnected.
right. And that kind of stuff's so cool when you just hear something that seems so disconnected from like what you're doing to the actual symptom. But that's what we hear all the time. I mean, I still get amazed by this stuff. Today, this wasn't even an FDN. It was a friend of mine that, I'd posted something about going gluten free. And she said she had tried that years ago and she still like rarely eats it. Now, of course, we understand the benefits of like full abstinence, but I won't go down that rabbit hole today. She had, given it a full try for like several months. And she said this back pain that I had always had and like attributed to sitting all day just became non-existent and it never came back. I'm like, wow, like you just wouldn't connect certain things like that. But she made no other changes at the time. And I love what you said about you're almost surprised how good you feel with the mental health stuff because I don't know how relatable it is for physical health issues unless they've gone on for a while. But I definitely empathize with, as someone who's gone through that himself, being a young person and having mental health issues like more often than not throughout your life. It's exactly what you said. You attribute it to your personality. Oh, this is just something that Evan has, or this is just how I am as Candace. And it's like, no, you're not supposed to be walking around having panic attacks all the time, or, feeling super depressed. There's absolutely things that can be done for this. And when the body is healthy, it does not want to be in those states. So I think that's really powerful. Now, I want to transition a little bit, since we talked about some of the things that you found in your own personal labs. If you've graduated, several years ago, you've been doing this work for a while, you bring two awesome perspectives, because you have the FDN philosophy, but then also, you're a counselor for people. I have a very, very cool individual in my area that I became friends with a few years ago, and she's like an integrative psychotherapist, so a similar concept. And I'm just like, that is exactly what I needed as a kid. So I can't even imagine some of the stories you probably have. I'd like to ask, like, what is one really cool client testimonial? Maybe someone that came in just not expecting what you were going to deliver, maybe did some of the FDN stuff, and then just was feeling like amazing afterwards. Like, what's a client testimonial that sticks out?
Yeah, I can think different directions. So is it okay if I give you a couple of them?
Please do. Yes.
Okay. From the mental health perspective, and like bringing in kind of this cortisol and like stress response, and the phases of the HPA axis, I have been seeing a woman for a little while now, and she was just in a very like hyped up, really kind of chronic stress state, single mom with 3 kids, and it just seemed, and a whole lot of trauma. And it seemed like, oh gosh, like I could work with her for years and it will never, will this even shift? And I asked her recently, because we've just sort of like methodically worked through things like you do, which is one thing I've learned about FDN is I'm never promising, right? We're never promising that somebody's going to have results. I'm just like, okay, what's the next thing? And just trust that working on the next thing that comes, that we'll see results. And when I talked to her, and we just were like going down the list again of things, like before she couldn't sleep, she couldn't really eat. She would get nauseous with eating. She would have kind of these like lots of anxiety, but be to the point where she couldn't even do her work. She couldn't focus. And now she is able to sleep at night. She's able to eat food. She's also has celiac, and she's able to work and be like really attentive. There are actually people who quit at work and she had to take on extra jobs, and she can like handle them. And she has kind of her list of things, because for me, like the stress piece is a big part of my work. So helping people learn some really like concrete strategies of how to help the body move into parasympathetic mode is something that I'm doing with pretty much everybody. And so she was doing that, and she said for the first time in her life, like she's able to be present. She's not just counting down the days until her boys are gonna graduate and maybe life would be less stressful. Like she feels able to be present with them, to laugh with them. And I just found it to be so powerful, because it was like she got her life back, in a life when she was just surviving. Now she's really able to like enjoy her children, and and she has feeling like for herself able to she said she'd never had the feeling of like happy, like good feelings for herself, that she can remember.
This is the side that people that, I'm guessing anyone listening to this has been through it, or seen someone go through it, but it's the side that's very hard to describe to others who haven't felt the grips of some type of chronic disease. It's never the disease itself. It's what the disease does to our emotions and our relationships. It is very hard to be focusing on your passion or career, or be able to show up for your spouse or your kids or your parents, even when you are feeling awful all the time. Now, I'm not justifying things that I've done or anyone else has done out there, but I'll tell you from firsthand experience, it is hard to show up for those things in your life when you're feeling like that. So I think that's so cool, to just what you described, like she's not counting down the days till graduation. It's like she can be present and enjoy that moment. So I love that one a lot. And you said there was maybe one or two more you wanted to share?
Yeah, well, I was thinking one of them that came up for me that I remember from a couple of years ago. I was, people come in with something and you think, oh my gosh, I've never dealt with that before. Like that's a new one. But with FDN, we're always like working with these basic things. And so it doesn't really matter necessarily what the problem is or what the primary complaint is, so much as we're going back to the basics. And so this woman came in and asked, she was having infertility struggles and she wanted my support on that. And it scared me. I thought, I don't know, that seems like a big deal. I was very, upfront about like, I can't promise you anything. But she was ready to jump in and she did pretty much like all the tests I had to offer, and really, was ready to implement whatever I asked her to, and had gut dysbiosis also in the exhaustive phase of the HPA axis, and she had some heavy metal stuff going on. There was thyroid that was sort of it was a little bit subclinical, so it hadn't been picked up by her doctors. And so anyway, we did all of this and I just, we just plugged away and did it all. And then she got pregnant and she was, of course, thrilled. And it's one of those things where you're like, wow, again, like this has a huge impact on someone's like whole life, more than just like, oh, they got rid of a symptom.
Well, I mean, how much bigger of an impact can there really be? I mean, I've never had a kid yet, but I can imagine that if you are trying to and you can't do that,
Right.
I would have to guess that that's probably one of the most bothersome things that you can experience, right? For many reasons.
Right. And there's the stress that comes with it that you're trying to tone down. I think that's like, okay, I'm getting older and I don't have much time. Like I need this to happen quickly.
Sure.
Right.
And I think someone already did it it was Jennifer Woodward. She's like all about this, very experienced with women's hormones and periods and cycles and stuff. And she was talking about, in a very simple way, thankfully for me, because like the hormone stuff can get pretty advanced. She was talking about how what's happening with these rates of infertility and all these problems is that when the body is under stress, it's not looking at that as a great time to try to have a baby, right? That's a low chance time that this is going to work out successfully. So it kind of shuts your body down for being able to do it. So
Absolutely.
again, in overly simplistic terms to a degree, what Candace did is, you don't have to treat infertility. You can remove stress from the body and then it does what it needs to do, because there's nothing more natural than childbirth, right? That's supposed to happen. So
Right.
I'm glad that you did both stories, because that's really, really cool. Well, I guess I have three final things.
Okay.
One is, I'd like to know where you want to see mental health go in this country. And this is, I mean, obviously a question I'm asking very specifically for you because I'm passionate about it. Like, what would you like to see change in counselors' offices and maybe psychiatrists' offices, not to go against the Western side of things, but maybe to combine the best of both worlds? Because not everyone's out there doing what you're doing, Candace.
Yeah. Yeah. I had this wonderful privilege like a year and a half ago to go to the IMMH, the like integrative mental health conference. And so there are medical doctors and psychiatrists and nurses and all people in the mental health space who are also like functional medicine, functional nutrition based too. And it was so inspiring to me to see like these people are doing this with research based information, and they're bringing like such a different tone, such a different perspective to it than is what is currently available in most of the mental health space that I have witnessed. So yeah, I mean, I feel that I'm thinking of that and how much there was inspiring to me. But to me, it seems like, I don't know, there's so much to say, but there's kind of this idea of like medication being sort of a magic bullet that can be like a quick response for people. And not then looking deeper, not even making all these connections to what all affects mental health, like we've been talking about. It can be food and food sensitivities. It can be celiac and gluten sensitivity is a major contributor. But then we also have like actual like trauma. Trauma is like huge as far as like our research on that now. I don't know if you're familiar with like the ACEs study and Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, and
I'm not, no.
how many people, it's really, really actually unsettling, like how many people have had major traumatic experiences before the age of 5. And so I think that that's almost like in a lot of ways, mental health has been like kind of compartmentalized into like, maybe it's a chemical imbalance and then you should talk through the bad things that happen to you, and that's kind of it in a way. There's plenty of people out there doing good work, so I'm not trying to sum up everybody, but it can feel like maybe that's all there is. And I just think that we have so much we can expand there. Mm-hmm. And what I found is that people in all these different disciplines and practices are really contributing to that. So as we think about like acupuncture or FDN or yoga or these, looking at these different spaces, they all have something to contribute to that, because mental health is so much more than just like, oh, you have a chemical imbalance, which I'm sure that you're aware of, but doesn't really have much scientific basis.
Yeah, well, oh my goodness. Yeah, we're opening up our...
give sources or whatever on that. But yeah, it seems like there's a lot to sort of unravel there and dismantle, because the general public has this idea that it's sort of fact, that for instance, depression is due to not having enough serotonin. If we can get more serotonin, then that's, just kind of this direct explanation. And really, like, there's so much more to that story.
If I always say, like, if people understood the quote unquote science behind the SSRIs and even the, what do you call it, neurotransmitters themselves, I think there would be a lot more hesitancy around. I'm not condemning medication. I'm just saying using those as like the first resort, because it is not as good as, like you just said, most people are led to believe.
Right. It's become almost like a cultural rhetoric or something of like it's like you know the explanation for things. And it was even fed, I think, through the American Psychiatry Association of like this, it's like insulin for diabetes. And yet the research just isn't there to back that up. And so then people oversimplify what's really going on, when there can be so many other factors and things that can really shift this to where we see these mental health diagnoses go away, which as we've already said, it can often feel like a life sentence to get certain mental health diagnoses. And often without the holistic perspective, people do end up kind of stuck there for their lifetimes. And so I really hope that can shift, and that we can see people get their lives back, like we're talking about.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think that was a good and thorough answer. And the one thing I reference it a lot and I say it a lot, and it's just because people need to really digest it. And that's from 1999 to 2016, suicide rates in America went up in every single state except one, which was Nevada, where it went down by a whopping 1%. I think the average was something like the high teens or the low 20s, and the highest state was North Dakota by 57%. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, that's the only thing, in my opinion, that definitively proves that mental health issues are actually going up. Why? Because how do you misdiagnose suicide?
Right.
We are absolutely identifying anxiety more easily than before. I experienced that myself. We went to a doctor, my family and I, at 5 years old when I was presenting with panic attacks. They said, don't worry about it. Ev gets himself a little too worked up. He's going to outgrow whatever this is. 15 years old, we come back for the same issue because now it's worse. Oh, that's a panic attack. Well, that's what he had 10 years ago, right? So this is absolutely progressing, but stats like that, we need to take a multifaceted approach. And our natural friends out there, I mean, Candace made some great points. You referenced trauma. You talked about that side of things. This is not just, all right, now let's take a bunch of supplements and eat better and that's it. Let's use the best of all the worlds to help these people out there who are dealing with these conditions. For the sake of time, I got 2 more quick questions for you, Candace. Number 1, in my opinion, the most important thing, where can people find you? Because you got like awesome energy. You're the type of person I can see you smiling through the audio. So that is, you got that vibe for sure. So people are like, all right, this is the type of counselor I need. I want to work with someone that has both philosophies. Where can they get in contact with you?
My website is sweetwateroffering.com. I lived in Thailand for a little while, and the Thai people called me Namwan, which means sweet water. So I use that name. So my email address is the same. It's sweetwateroffering@gmail.com. So everywhere you can find me, it's that. So Facebook, Sweetwater Offering, Instagram, same thing.
I'm glad that came up because when I was sending the confirmation to that email, I was just like, what does that mean? That's really cool. Now, my final question, which maybe is not the most important, but it is one of my favorite ones, is our signature question to all of our health professionals out there. And I know that this is always a tough one because we're always thinking deeper than just one thing, but humor me. That's what I ask to everyone. If Candace could only change one thing about people's health in this world, like let's say you could get everyone to do one habit or rather not do one thing, what would you change for people's health?
I think, again, it's what we've talked about quite a bit here, but this stress response, this living in chronic stress state, I would love to change that for everyone. And there's so many good resources out there, but I think about it so often right now as there's tension in our country and as like this seems to be affecting relationships within families and friendships. And I think if we could bring down our nervous system activation, then we could connect, we could listen to each other, we could regain health, and we could find a way forward in ways that are more peaceful and loving.
Well, I do admit, I think that's something easier said than done, probably, but it's something that we all need, especially in today's world. And the really good news is I think we are becoming more focused as a species on that. We're becoming aware of it, and we're realizing the effects of these daily little stresses on our body. So I love to see that. It's something I didn't really see happening in the world when I was a kid, and to see that now as an adult is an amazing thing. That'll be all for our interview today, folks. If you would be so kind to go on Apple Podcasts and please leave us a 5-star review, we would really appreciate that. If you like the information that we're sharing, think about how many other people out there could also use it. Those types of ratings and reviews allow us to get higher up in the rankings so that more people can hear about this information. Because let's be honest, we're talking about some things on this podcast that are definitely not common knowledge. Well, our next episode is going to be our first non-FDN making a guest appearance, and his name is also Evan. What are we going to be talking about? Well, tune into that episode to find out. We will talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to the FDN-Thrive podcast. If you feel like you've been stuck in the cycle of trial and error when it comes to your health issues, our team can help. Whether you've tried every different diet out there without lasting success, spent way too much money on supplements at your local health food store, or been told that your lab tests are normal despite feeling anything but normal, we have your back. Go to FDNthrive.com and click the Get Started Here button if you're ready to stop playing guessing games with your health. That's FDNthrive.com.